Good afternoon and welcome to the programme. A time for cool heads, the words of Britain's Foreign Minister warning against any escalation with Iran. Jeremy Hunt has been speaking after the UK decided to send a second warship to the Gulf amid rising tensions there. Neil O'Reilly has more.
As another British warship steams towards the Gulf, the UK is navigating a difficult course. The government says it doesn't want to escalate tensions with Iran, but acknowledges it's in talks with the US about building up their military presence in the region. The detention of an Iranian supertanker off Gibraltar by British Marines triggered this latest crisis. The territory's leader claiming to have proof of an illegal oil cargo bound for Syria.
After laboratory testing, the cargo has now been confirmed to be 2.1 million barrels of light crude oil. We will not allow Gibraltar to be used or to be knowingly or unknowingly complicit in the breach of EU or other international sanctions or for any of the matters which our laws prohibit.
In response, Tehran has threatened to retaliate against British ships. Iran's foreign minister has also dismissed accusations of sanctions busting.
The sanctions are meant to stop Europe from buying Syria's oil. They're not about another country selling oil to Syria. It's a very childish and ridiculous excuse by the British. They should officially announce that they are servants of America and act on behalf of America. America has returned their favour well by insulting their ambassador and their prime minister.
Washington is pushing its allies for further sanctions on Iran's oil exports, a move being resisted by European powers. But as tensions mount, they're finding it increasingly difficult not to take sides. Neil O'Reilly, Euronews.
Well, let's delve deeper into this story now and discuss this with Ian Bond, who joins us from London. He's Director of Foreign Policy at the Centre for European Reform, the think tank. Well, thanks for taking time to speak to us. Well, we've heard from Britain's Foreign Secretary saying that he wants to de-escalate the situation. So don't you think that sending warships sends the wrong signals?
Well, my understanding is that this is in part to ensure that there isn't a gap in coverage in the Gulf, because HMS Montrose, which is the ship that's there at the moment, is due for a bit of downtime. So you have to be prudent, and in current circumstances, I think the British government obviously judged that it did not want to have a situation where there might be a period with no British ships in the area, and British commercial shipping potentially under threat from Iran. So I think this is just a prudent measure to make sure that we retain the same amount of coverage.
But in terms of a signal, how can Britain sort of balance or take this very tricky balancing act of wanting to send a message saying that it's not going to be messed with, but at the same time it's a crucial component of this nuclear deal which Europe is still trying to maintain?
Yeah, and I think one has to keep these two things separate, because the question of whether or not Iran has been breaching sanctions, EU sanctions in relation to Syria, is one thing, and that's completely separate from the question of whether Iran is or is not living up to its commitments under the nuclear deal. Now, clearly the British government is also very concerned about the fact that Iran has started to enrich uranium to a higher level than is permitted by that agreement. And in many respects, I'd say that was even more worrying than the developments at sea in the Gulf.
Yeah. You say they're separate issues, but they seem to be inextricably twined, because London seems to be torn between Washington and the demands of its EU partners, doesn't it?
Well, I think in this case, they really are separate issues. I mean, it is certainly the case that the Americans are trying to increase the pressure on Iran across the board in relation to the nuclear dossier, in relation to Iran's activity in the region and so on. But in this particular case, the reason that the British stopped, or at the request of the Gibraltar government, the British stopped this Iranian tanker, was because of a suspected breach of sanctions in relation to Syria, not as a means of putting pressure on Iran or punishing Iran for what's going on in the nuclear area. And I know that for the Iranian government, they may well see this all as part of an American plot, But the fact is that you've got two different processes going on here, and I'm pretty sure that the British government will be telling the Iranians these are two different things, don't get them mixed up.
Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform, thank you.